Put a little bit of walnut sauce in that frazzle drip.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
Hold the weapons! Now! Charge the lightning field!
Welcome back to Dispatch Ajax. I'm Skip.
I'm Jake.
That's Jake. Yeah, so this is a controversial one and kind of a sad topic that we have to cover, but it is important to the integrity of art in general, but also a very important piece of history that is also geek literature. The graphic novel Mouse by Art Spiegelman, which depicts the plight of the Jewish peoples during the Holocaust, to the backdrop of anthropomorphic mice as the Jews and anthropomorphic cats as the Nazis, which is an avant-garde and raw look at what really happened from a different perspective than we all got in school. And the reason we're doing this is because in January 2022, the Board of Trustees of McMinn County, Tennessee, removed the book from their school's curriculum. They claimed it was because of brief nudity, which is absolutely absurd to think about. Because, I mean, how many other books talk about?
Well, you're actually seeing these mice boobs, and that's a problem.
Oh, yeah, you can't get titillated by mice boobs.
Plus all those foul words they were using. I mean, come on now.
It's like banning Schindler's List because they showed depictions of smoking.
Yeah.
Literally, it was just an excuse to whitewash what happened during the Holocaust. I don't think it was a conscious racist act as much as it was a subconscious act where the people involved felt uncomfortable with the fact that there was a reckoning confronting the history of white European colonialism that culminates in that.
Yeah, they don't want to make themselves feel uncomfortable.
Right, exactly. The kids were fine with it. I'm sure the kids were totally great with it, but
kids for decades have been better for it all across the world. It's a great way to expose them to the horrors of the Holocaust in a way that it's easy to understand, it's easy to identify with, it flows really well, it's really well done. The idea that they're going to ban that for asinine, bogus reasons.
Yeah, it's very obvious, like, whatever their bullshit excuse is not what's really going on. So we don't want to spoil anything, even though I'm pretty sure you know how World War II ends.
Well, it depends on which revisionist historian you're listening to.
Well, that's true. It's a man confronting his demons about his parents and himself to the backdrop of the worst genocide in human history, or at least the most efficient genocide in human history. I don't know. It was originally conceived as a 3-page comic strip in 1972, which gave Art Spiegelman an opportunity to interview his father about his life during World War II. And then those interviews eventually compiled into a book, which he started writing in 78. And then he serialized the strip, Mouse, all the way from 1980 to 91.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Especially one that's now just one book. It was an insert to the magazine Raw. So it wasn't really compiled into a book until 92, which immediately won a Pulitzer Prize.
As it deserves.
I remember going to one of those touring Holocaust lectures, and that was one of the things they talked about. They presented us with a copy of Mouse and was like, this is so you can understand what happened. I mean, and I was already a little familiar because I was one of those kids that had an aunt with a serial number tattooed on her arm.
Oh, wow.
I remember asking that question, when I was a kid, understanding the scope of it. We need to be more conscious of the perspective of the people that actually lived through this. And denying that to kids, I think, only causes more damage. And it's only more likely that it'll happen again in the future.
Yeah, you're taught this history for a reason. And by taking that away, you open up the door.
We're not going to just break down Mouse because you really should just read it yourself.
Yeah, read the book. Again, it's like they always say, if anybody bans a book, go read it. Read what they don't want you to see, don't want you to know.
The schools that banned Mouse probably didn't ban, like, Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
It's kind of naked racism.
I would say I don't mean to make judgments about this town in Tennessee, but I will make said judgments. Somehow I think they're not in a fervor about the Joe Rogan podcast, saying the N-word 118 times.
Okay, all right. I guarantee you they love Gone with the Wind. I'll just say that.
Yeah. But I mean, that's one of the things we want to talk about today is that there is ideology that underpins a lot of this and a lot of what we see going on in politics today all over the world that is kind of utilizing lies about different people to then oppress those people.
In the populist sense, to rally people behind a cause, and that cause always ends up being the other.
Exactly.
It's just playing on people's fears about the world changing around them. This has always happened in human history. Since we started societies, it's always been this way, and marginalized groups have always been scapegoats. It's sad to say, but when you break it all down throughout history, except for a few outside incidents like the Rwandan genocide and things like that, it's almost always the Jewish peoples. For some reason, they've been the punching bag of the world for 3,000 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really don't understand why, but it's something pervasive that has been in our society since society. So we wanted to break down the root of these types of propaganda that lead to conspiracy theories, to hate groups, even if things that you subscribe to you don't think are hateful, but totally are.
One might say it's because of these ideas that things like banning mouse happens. It's not a to-be kind of thing, but you plant A generations ago, and it continually gets passed down, and it just bleeds into the social psyche. I don't think these people are choosing, like, no, we don't believe in the Holocaust. No, we don't like Jews. But there's something innate that has been passed down to them through ideologies like this.
It's like people that clutch their purse when a black man walks by, even though they don't know they're doing it, you know?
Yeah.
It's an inherent systematic racism. And books like Mouse are out there on purpose to expose that systematic racism. Unfortunately, that will cause some backlash. Some blatant and some more subconscious. So we wanted to sort of dive down into the roots of where these come from so that if you find yourself on 8kun or
Leave.
Jan or...
What are you doing? Get off of there.
Yeah, right, exactly. If you're on Telegram or something and you follow down this rabbit hole of conspiracy, you better check yourself before you wreck yourself, because we're going to give you the origins of all of these conspiracies. They all have a root cause. There's an evolutionary divergence.
I think that one might fall on deaf ears from some of the people who are opposed to this podcast already.
That might be true. Well, I mean, the Earth is only 6,000 years old, so I mean...
And it's flat as a pancake.
We're going to focus mostly in this episode on... the infamous Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Yeah, and for any of you who haven't heard of this before, this is kind of your underpinning documentation, validation that hate groups and conspiracists have used since
1850 around?
Well, I mean, it wasn't made yet.
The ingredients were there.
Yeah, but definitely early 1900s till today, always at the underlying root cause.
Including the Nazis. I mean, the Nazis were
100%
overjoyed to use it, even though it had already existed for decades before that. In this story, there are Jewish elders from different communities standing around a bonfire in like cloaks, performing unholy rituals and literally plotting out the fate of the rest of the world, which they do now at what is that? The retreat.
Bohemian Grove?
Bohemian Grove, yeah. It's essentially Bohemian Grove.
Yeah.
But not real.
Yeah, I mean, this is, the Jews have a G7 summit, and they all get together, and they talk it out behind the closed doors. And it gets into things, as trivial as taxation, of ways we're going to subvert the Gentile into doing what we want them to do.
Yeah, basically like dissecting every ill in society, not just generally, but every ill in society, and assigning it specifically to the Jewish peoples. Drawing that string between everything that's gone wrong in your life away from anywhere other than where it actually belongs.
Yeah, this is a document that has been printed globally and been used in some form or fashion, against mostly Jews, but even gets put on other people, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's in Brazil, Canada, India, everywhere. It's all over the place.
Those are the only countries.
That's it. Those are the four. We all fall into one of those.
Yeah. For some reason, the protocol's still used in propaganda today. even if you don't know it, blatantly or more subtly. And by subtle, we mean subtle for people that follow that kind of stuff, not subtle for people who can read. But it's still there. The grandfather of almost all modern conspiracy theories.
Yes. And we're touching on that in a pop geek culture kind of way, in both pointing out its use in doing away with Mouse as a banned book, but also Will Eisner wrote a book about the protocols called The Plot, The Secret Story of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which I read and shall give a little review.
Please do.
At the appropriate moment. But it's a really fascinating and worthy read, and it's much easier than trying to just read a book about the protocols or read the protocols himself. He tried to make it for a general audience to kind of see where this is coming from, how this is created, and what it's used for. And it's a comic book.
And Will Eisner, one of the most prolific, obviously. He and Jack Kirby are like creme de la creme, cream of the crop.
Rises to the top.
A number one. They're the Dukes of New York.
Kind of.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that people don't realize is this is actually pertinent because a huge chunk of comic book history is Jewish. It has its roots in Jewish culture.
100%.
Whether you know it or not, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel were two Jewish men from, I think, Cleveland originally, right? And then they lived in New York.
I believe so.
And they created Superman as a way to tell the story of Moses, put in a reed basket, sent down the river to save a people's, without overtly being religious, because it was, at that point, of course, still taboo to be a Jewish person, no matter where you were, even in New York. So, and then, Stan Lee was Jewish.
Yep. Jack Kirby.
Gil
Kane.
Who created Batman. Well, kind of. Half created Batman. Will Eisner.
The man who invented the comic book, Max Gaines.
Also a Jewish person, yeah.
My Google history is going to be...
Weird Google search history?
Yeah. XYZ, are they Jewish?
Oh, I don't like where this is going.
I know. I'm not feeling too good.
But I mean, yeah, the history of comic books, and really the history of art in America especially, is most of the history of all art forms in America stems from either people of color or Jewish people. That's most of modern culture. And it's been co-opted and twisted and claimed by the white establishment, but that's just the way it is. So we want to explore that and help you understand when you hear, I don't know, Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro or somebody ranting about crap like this. You got to understand that the arguments they're making aren't new. They're very old and they're very easily combated. So we're going to tell you where they come from so that you can apply them when thinking critically about things in the future.
Ad break.
So, in the modern sense, most of what we're talking about was born in Russia because Russia became an Orthodox Christian empire. They even have their own pope.
Everybody's got to have their own pope.
Everybody's got their own pope.
Brazil has their own pope. Canada has their own pope. Egypt, India. Those are the 4 countries. They all have their own pope.
It's the 4 popes. It's one of my favorite Doctor Who episodes.
4 popes walk into a bar.
The 4 popes just sounds like is Jonathan Pryce, is he in that movie? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
I think it's actually a band from the 50s, the 4 popes. They didn't take off like the 4 tops, but...
Yeah, so even during like one of the many plagues of the Middle Ages, they would always blame it on, blame whatever illness on the other. Often the Jewish peoples, who were the minority in Europe and traditional punching bag. So there was a baked-in resentment, specifically in Russia. And basically, anytime things weren't going well for the Tsar, he would cook up some sort of scapegoat reason why it was the Jews. One of the things you have to understand about this kind of thinking and blaming people for the ills of society are human beings have this really annoying habit of when the system doesn't work, because it's an inadequate and an inequitable system, but everyone has always been told that it works, they find alternate reasons why it doesn't work. Not because the system's wrong, but because there must be some conspiracy that's keeping it from working. And more often than not, that falls to the Jews.
Yeah, it's an easy way to explain the inexplicable when things are too complicated. If you try to break down the financial system, why am I not making the money that I should be making? You could go through all of these how the system's designed to be against you, socio-political issues that are set in stone in the way that we are stratified as a global populace. All of these things that are complicated and it's hard to explain or understand or get out of. It's much easier to find one person or one group and say, this is the reason. It's because of them. Whether it's Jews, whether it's migrant workers, whether it's indigenous people, whether it's
Black people,
the welfare state, whatever reason it is, it's usually rich people shoving off, don't look at me, look at this other group that's just as oppressed as you are, if not more so, and blame them instead of us.
Right. And then it's used as an excuse to sort of either genocide those people out of the way, or just to sort of, in modern society, subtly oppress them institutionally, which I think is even more insidious, because at least one is more honest with what it is.
Yeah, in Russia, in the 1890s, you had Tsar Nicholas II, which you may know from, like, Anastasia. That's Anastasia's dad, you know? I'm just pointing out things that might help people to...
I get it.
Or like Rasputin. You know, it's Rasputin who's hanging out with the Nicholas.
They did not get along, by the way.
They didn't, no. But his wife sure liked him. But you have him, and he's kind of easily swayed by the people around him. And one of the voices that was in his ear was Sergei Yulovich. And he was kind of like trying to push for a liberal, modernistic view to try and like bring Russia into the future. But a lot of the conservatives behind the scenes, they were against this. And
Shocker.
They had to figure out a way to get inside the Tsar's head and poison this kind of liberal ideology, this like moving forward. So this is kind of where the whole idea of the protocols comes from in a weird way. Because they were trying to stop that. They ended up being able to tie Judaism with kind of liberal modernization. And by doing that, you allowed the Tsar to kind of be swayed and pointed at these people when things went wrong. And that's when you had a lot of pogroms and Jews just being murdered and
scapegoated.
Yep, exactly. It doesn't even start out necessarily as a Jewish... I mean, it's hard to say that it's not anti-Jew, but... The people behind the scenes were like, I hate Jews, so let's point at the Jews. It was like, we need to find someone to point at. Someone that is easily hateable and frame them. And that's the beginning of the protocols.
So the protocols is the first really consolidated version of this phenomena, but it is rooted in a lot of stuff in the past too. Specifically, I think we could probably start in 1864 with Dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu.
I mean, you're going as far back, you know, at least in England of 1144, where the Jews were falsely accused for ritually murdering a boy. And then similar accusations throughout England and then throughout continental Europe, which I think consists of, I guess, just Egypt? Yeah, we're just going to go with Egypt as continental
It's
Europe.
Egypt now. Yeah, it's just the 4 countries.
Well, that's the one. That's the Euro-Egypt. That's what they call it.
Euro-Egypt.
I'm trying to inject any type of humor into this dour episode. It's a tough one. We're doing this because we think it's something everybody should know, and we want to provide a pathway to this knowledge that is easily accessible, because this underpins everything you're seeing on TV. You're getting inundated with the thing people are stumping in the ballot box. These are the things that they talk about and believe in.
They still are using these things. Even if they don't know they're using them, they're still using them. These are all the archetypes, point by point, of every modern conspiracy theory / whataboutism and scapegoated marginalized group. All of it comes from this.
The establishment has trillions of dollars at stake in this election. For those who control the levers of power in Washington, and for the global special interest, they partner with these people that don't have your good in mind. The political establishment that is trying to stop us is the same group responsible for our disastrous trade deals, massive illegal immigration, and economic and foreign policies that have bled our country dry.
100%. It's those ideas of the evilness of Jews, the innate evilness, and the plotting, scheming that allowed them to become scapegoats. It's weird that it's like a lie that's applied to someone then allows another bigger lie to build off of that, and it just goes on and on.
Like inventing a rock.
I mean, it's turtles all the way down. Jewish turtles.
Yeah, right.
So what I want to talk about was the plot. It's Will Eisner's graphic novel about the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, Will Eisner was the son of Jews escaping to America away from the oppression and war in Europe in the early 1900s. Will Eisner is a literal legend in comic books. He was there since the birth of the art form in the 30s. He created the Spirit in 1940 in an innovative 16-page insert form in the Sunday paper that went out to millions at the time. In the 40s, he worked for the U.S. Army, working at instructional comic books that helped teach soldiers different things and different propaganda. In 1978, he created the first graphic novel, A Contract with God. Great book. Go out and read it. The awards in the comic book industry are called the Eisners, which demonstrates just how important and influential Will Eisner was and continues to be till this day.
And had almost the exact same handwriting as Walt Disney.
It really does. I think it's
it's weird,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah. Here, can you see it, guys? I'm holding it up for you. No, but
honestly, though, Will Eisner also not only a great storyteller and great illustrator, but one of the greatest graphic designers I've ever seen. His covers,
oh man, yes,
are to this day mind blowing.
Just Google the Spirit covers. It's untouchable. You see, they're even artists today are still trying to do what he did all the time, and I don't know if he's even been matched.
I don't think anyone's ever come close. I've taught this in classes. If you want to know what comic books really are, go look at these covers, because this says it all, combining text with imagery in a way that is exclusive to comic books and also the best design you've ever seen. It's fantastic.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Like Jack Kirby,
It's difficult. Sometimes you're comparing apples and kumquats a bit. And they're both tasty.
Quapples.
Get your quapples here.
Get your fresh, homemade, all-American quapples.
There is no America. It's only Canada. Remember? There's Brazil land, Canada, your Egypt, and Indiana. That's it.
The state of Indiana.
Wait, I thought we named the dog Indiana. So Will Eisner worked for 20 years trying to grapple with the protocols and exposed the perpetuating lie there within. I think he was trying to understand it, its power, its undeniable endurance. Being logical and sensible, this insidious misinformation always felt like a bridge made of straw that had to collapse eventually. So he just kept waiting for that to happen as he pushed on with making this book. There was nothing there. It has been proven false, and its vileness was so apparent that people had to realize what it was. Kind of like the Wile E. Coyote when he runs off a cliff, and it takes him a beat to become cognizant of his eventual gravitational demise. There's just nothing there. They have to know. They have to figure it out. Unfortunately, Eisner found that the truth has endured, not only for the 120 years of the existence of the protocols, but of haves and have-nots throughout layered civilization. Marginalized groups will be targeted and blamed as the other and the enemy for those other less fortunates. An easy answer that doesn't make sense, but provides an outlet for whatever pent-up anger is driving them. Now, the purpose of the plot, which is the Will Eisner book, was creating an easily accessible explanation and delineation of the protocols, their purpose and their history. The format of the graphic novel was his vehicle and his voice, a wonderful tool to entertain the masses while teaching vital stuff. Its focus was less on the philosophies and details of the protocols, but more about the operatic palace intrigue and the dark alleyways, political maneuvering of the people behind its creation. I thought it helped connect the strands of this web and see how one plot and action tied into another over decade after decade. And he does a great job of laying the groundwork. We see the origins of the protocols, namely the individuals involved, and there's a long history starting way back in 1848 and last touching on in 2003. So he wrote his last things in 2003, which is just 2 years before he passed. Now, the book, it all begins with the dialogue in hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, which is written by Maurice Joly. Now, this was an anti-French writing. Well, no, not anti-French writing. This was...
Which would have just made it English or German.
So Maurice Joly hated the emperor of France, specifically Louis Napoleon, or Napoleon III. And so he wrote about this, and it served as the inspiration to later on be plagiarized for the protocols. He wrote a book that was essentially two people in hell, Machiavelli and Montesquieu, and Machiavelli he kind of tried to tie the ideas in The Prince, Machiavelli's writing, with the ideology of the emperor and show how that the empire was oppressing the common man. It didn't really go anywhere. He was arrested and actually multiple times, and he died with nothing, killing himself in 1864, I believe.
It wasn't a great commentary, but you see where he was going with it.
Yeah, no, it was. He had already been arrested for going against the emperor. That was an offense that was punishable by jailing. So this is a kind of a way to subvert that, kind of like, here's like what I'm really trying to say, that the people are smart and they'll figure it out.
Even if my writing sucks.
Even if my writing is atrocious.
There is a modern parallel to that. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a literary tool that's been used time and time again.
Oh, yeah.
You know, subversive, using metaphors to try and...
Like when Bill Hicks would come to Jesse, the preacher. You don't remember Preacher? Have you read Preacher recently?
Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
Remember Bill Hicks was...
Yeah, I thought you meant he was coming to a literal preacher, and I was like...
No, Jesse.
Yeah. Yes.
No, Jesse from Breaking Bad. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
In fact, Neil Gaiman uses that tool a lot in Sandman, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people use it. It's very popular. It's a way to say what you want to say without being so overt, which is kind of what the protocols are all about, really. So then, like, we come back to what we were speaking for, the Russian political scene that set up the necessity for the protocols, which was essentially trying to influence the Tsar and tying Jews to liberal modernization and trying to give someone to blame. And so they ended up hiring the author of the protocols, a guy named Matthew Golovinsky, who's honestly, at least, if everything within Will Eisner's The Plot is to be believed, he's a total piece of shit. Just like
no doubt,
top-notch asshole. Yes, that guy in hell.
Like Nazi inner circle type asshole.
Yes. I'm sure he has some artistic license here, but even from like a child, he's a little prick. He goes into the police and he ends up plagiarizing things and making up evidence against people in court.
But there were no checks and balances in place, so it didn't matter. He'd just get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, he would. All of these people, either they went to prison or they died because this guy was just doing awful things. He ended up
like as a Portland cop.
Well, I mean, Golovinsky was just one bad apple, really. That's what it was. So he gets hired by the Russians, and they're like, well, we can't really have him doing that stuff here. So then he gets sent off essentially to France after a wide range of things that got set aside. And he ends up making this forgery where he takes this little known book of the dialogue in hell and he applies it to the Jews, because the Jews at that time just had the Zionist Congress that met the year before. And they needed a way to fabricate a manifesto of the Jews that felt like it sounded right. So they used this Congress of these Jewish leaders to have them dictate their plans for world domination and the subjugation of Gentiles through insidious means. He did that by essentially copying what was in the dialogue, but as it's said by these Jewish leaders. And by doing this, it would seem like it had an air of righteousness, that it was real, and it's a secret document that is kind of leaked out, which is what people thought, because it then gets picked up by Sergius Nihilus, Dr. Nihilus, which is, I mean...
Dr. Nihilus to you.
It's a hell of a name.
That is an awesome name, though, I have to say.
Yeah. So he finds this a few years later through back channels, which is exactly what they wanted to happen, and he takes it as fact, and then he brings this to the Tsar. He needs to hear about this, and he needs to know about this. The Tsar gets convinced by this Jewish plot. His main right-hand man advisor is done away with because he kind of sees through this plot early on. And over the next, about 1905 and beyond, that's when the more pogroms start. He keeps creating the Duma, getting away with the Duma, and the protocols are published in Russian and start getting circulated, where you would literally have monarchists all around in your Egypt telling their people, reading them aloud to their illiterate peasants, so that it just indoctrinated on a subtle level. After that, things don't go well for the Tsar.
You think?
The Bolshevik Revolution after World War I.
During World War I.
Yeah, I mean, 1914 is World War I starts, and then 1917 is when you have strikes and riots, and the Bolsheviks kind of come up and come...
They're opportunists.
Yeah. And a lot of the Russian aristocracy then flees Russia, but they take along these protocols with them all throughout Europe. And by 1920, you have the Times in London publishing, this is what's happening that you don't know about. Kind of this Zionist propaganda is out out there, and it's the Jewish peril is what they call it. They kind of set people up for, this is real, the Jews are out to get us all, and everyone should know about this. And in the 20s, you get a reporter who...
For the Times?
Yes, yeah, a reporter for the Times. You get Philip Graves, and he is met by Mikhail Roslovev, a Russian emigre. Hey, I saw that you printed this thing about the protocols, but did you know that this protocol was actually fake and it's been plagiarized from this other book? So at least in the book, you go on for pages and pages and pages where you have them talking about this obvious plagiarism, and you see a part of the dialogue, and then you see a part of the protocols. And I mean, a lot of it, he like copied a Wikipedia entry and just changed a couple words in the modern parlance. It's near word for word.
In the conversation?
Yes. So Golovinsky took the dialogues, and he didn't even try to really hide it. I think maybe he thought that it was too obscure and that no one would find the link between the two. Or maybe just didn't care. I mean, it's not like he had any scruples.
Well, and honestly, he was right. It had that long to find the connection between the two. People were willing to take it on face value.
Yeah, he was literally making a Machiavellian plot. Literally, of the Jews. Unfortunately, it is something that no matter how many times it's been proven wrong, you can see the side-by-side comparisons, and the truth of it is undeniable and blatant.
Mm-hmm.
But it just keeps persevering. Most of the rest of the book is him going through the history of the case against the protocols, whether it's, the Times newspaper expose, the Jewish peril exposed, historic fake, details of the forgery, more parallels. You get French court cases. You get the actual people who were involved in that Jewish group who got together saying that this didn't happen. You get the U.S. Senate denouncing the protocols as fabricated historic document in 1964.
Wow.
Yeah, you see, he just lays it out of it getting slammed in the court of reality again and again and again. But he intersperses it with the 30s, where, of course, well, technically, he starts in the 20s, and you start to see how it takes off in Germany. You get to see a little bit of how Mein Kampf talks about the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
It does.
Hey, this is the proof we need. You can see that this is their plan. And it didn't matter how many lawsuits. It didn't matter how many times it was exposed in paper, in politics. It just kept going on.
And one of the most insidious things is that most people don't realize they're referencing it when they reference it. Like they don't really understand that it is the protocols. They're not blatantly saying or drawing a direct parallel, but a lot of times in conspiracy theories and things, the framework is the exact premise or snippets from the protocols, whether or not they know that that's what it's from. But yeah, it's there.
I think a big part of this is you have certain voices. You have Germany and the Nazi Party capitalizing on this. You have 1920 Henry Ford buying the Dearborn Independent and beginning a series called The International Jew, which is essentially made up from borrowings of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And he put that out for years.
Even in the 40s. Right?
Yeah. 1922 was published in 16 languages for worldwide distribution. It sold over 500,000 copies in America alone. And even though Ford recanted in 1926 when he was threatened with libel, it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Henry Ford was world famous. And so this just passes on to other people, and they just keep spewing it out. And that was perhaps was the most defining thing, was putting a face to all this bigotry within the book and see how it shuns logic or reason in favor of self-gratifying hatred. From the Nazis, which they show in this book, to just the masses. You see just people at rallies, at protests, not against Jews necessarily, but you see how it just poisons people's minds. And he really does a good job of seeing the circular logic. This has to be true, and that if it's not true, then it doesn't matter if someone's saying it's not true because they must be a Jew themselves or they love Jews. And This is the creation of fake news.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
A line that he says at the beginning of the book is apt and universal, unfortunately. Whenever one group of people is taught to hate another, a lie is created to inflame that hatred and justify the plot. The target is easy to find because the enemy is always the other. So this is an historical graphic novel. I wouldn't say go take this on the beach and read it for fun. It's well done, but not exactly enjoyable. It's somewhat dry, but I think the importance is undoubtable. And with the enduring torture that the protocols have wrought, being widely distributed and referenced by the extreme right, those who hover around Q, and other extreme thought tiers, I think it pops up on the fringe with people like Flat Earth, New World Order, obviously, reptiloids, apocalyptic evangelicals, goes
Hollow
on
Earth
and
people.
on. Hollow Earth, moon megastructure, literally any type of
moon landing deniers.
Yeah. It
Holocaust
it
deniers.
runs the gamut. It almost always ties back to the Jews.
Yeah, and we're going to explain why anti-vaxxers, for instance, we're going to get into why you might not off the surface think like, oh, how is that possibly related? It is. Whatever you're hearing, it all ties back to that.
It truly does.
So.
The protocols are a baseline supposition to many anti-Semitic groups, and those who don't view themselves as distinctly anti-Semitic, but often tie into things like the globalist, the megabanks, the elites. Those all are vague references to the Jews. Eisner does a good job at seeing this consistent spread and pointing out all the reprintings all over the globe, and points to its influence with the Nazis, but also with plenty of their quote-unquote normal people, protesting whatever theoretical oppression they find themselves under. You can tell he is flustered in this entire book, and seeing that it's staying power of the protocols, and the protocol's control of the narrative, that no matter how often it is maligned and how often it is refuted with outright facts, or seeing how truly atrocious it is and what it's trying to say, it's just a vampiric virus that just keeps on sucking from its inception till today.
Yeah, and it wasn't the first. This goes back to the Middle Ages, really. But the protocols were plagiarized from a lot of other books that came out around the time, including from some batshit nut dude named Frederick Milligan, who also went by the name Osman Bey. He briefly was an officer in the Ottoman Empire, then strangely sailed to New York to try and join the Union to fight in the Civil War. But by the time he got there, it was over, so it didn't matter.
Good job, dude.
Yeah, nailed it. And why are you fighting for the Union if you're so anti-Semitic? I don't understand. So he published a book called The Conquest of the World by the Jews in 1878.
Look, that sounds like a page turner.
I know, right? He was technically a British citizen, but fought in the Ottoman army. He was a rich kid, kind of like Osama bin Laden, who studied somewhere else and then came back militarized. In The Conquest of the World by the Jews, it's one of the early times you see blood libel mentioned, even though that's going to become more of a thing later. And so this is one of the texts that's blatantly ripped off in the protocols. And interestingly enough, because he traveled to the United States, he brought his anti-Semitic work to the U.S., which was published in 1878 by a St. Louis publisher. Thank you, St. Louis. Nailing it again.
Standards are high.
And so when that was published in the U.S., it fell on deaf ears. Nobody really gave a shit. But 100 years later or so, Ku Klux Klan would rediscover it and use it as a rallying cry along with the protocols, as proof that even if the protocols weren't real, this was already a thing. But it goes back farther than that, but it's really not necessarily important to get into that too much because there's just a ton of them, or just basically a bunch of anti-Semitic writers who publish stuff very, very similar. I mean, every cartoony thing you can possibly think of. They also obviously villainize the Freemasons and everybody else. In 1868, a novel called To Sedan contains a chapter written by Sir John Ratcliffe. That was a pen name. It contains a chapter called The Jewish Cemetery in Prague and the Council of Representatives of the 12 Tribes of Israel. Really rolls off the tongue.
I mean, all of these do. None of these are really good titles.
And this is where you get the real basis of the plot of Protocols, where it's these Jewish elders in a cemetery around some sort of holy structure doing a midnight ceremony where they talk about, obviously, their conquering of the world or whatever. Which is funny because that's also plagiarized from a scene from Alexander Dumas's Giuseppe Balsamo, where two characters plot the affair of the diamond necklace.
Hot.
Not the girl with the pearl necklace. That's different.
Ooh.
It's all plagiarized. Go back as far as you want. This is all copying a copy of a copy of a copy, to the extent that nowadays it's so faded out that it doesn't even necessarily have to mention Jewish people. It just implies it, even if you don't know it. all throughout the latter half of the 19th century, there were people who wrote books like this. But the Protocols was essentially a Reader's Digest version of all of these conspiracies. It combined all of these other books and picked and chose what it wanted, and put them all in one easy-to-read Cliff's Notes for anti-Semites. And because it was so accessible and because it was so comprehensive, even though it's not really all that sophisticated, I think it's one of the reasons it has staying power. It's really sad. It was promoted by people all around the world, world leaders, people in power, usually white people, Christian people. That's always the case.
Yeah, like I said, it was in India, in Egypt, in Japan.
All the countries.
I added Japan. Japan's a new one. It just came on the scene.
Well, okay, so according to an author named Daniel Pipes, who wrote about this as well, one of the major things about this and its staying power is that it's so vague. There's no names, there are no dates, no real specific plans, just general, overtures. It was supposedly written by a Jewish person, which makes it more convincing for people. It's like when on Fox News, when you have the one black guy, It embraces contradiction. This is going to come back again later, too, where it rails against both capitalism and communism at the same time. And it both embraces democracy and tyranny. It's so vague and so broad that it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, conservative or liberal, or anyone else. I mean, anything. You could be Christian, you could be Muslim, you could be Shinto. It doesn't matter. You're going to see something in this because it's just these broad strokes of stereotypes.
Yeah, I love themes that Pipes points out of the book, like Jews always scheme, Jews are everywhere, Jews are behind every institution, Jews obey a central authority, the shadowy elders, and the Jews are always close to success, so thus need to be stopped.
Yeah, so anybody who is into conspiracy theories, does this sound familiar to you?
It should.
Is this ringing any bells? I mean, I'm not talking about the actual anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists, but anybody else? Is this ringing bells?
Yeah. Anti-vax is a perfect thing, where it's something that this should have nothing to do with the Jews. This shouldn't be anti-Semitic, but you see how this is all laid out in the exact same way. And on Fox or Alex Jones, he talks about globalists, or he talks about the migrant caravans, and they're all being funded by George Soros.
George Soros.
I wonder why that is.
Why is he villainized? You know what? Because he's not even all that rich. He's not that influential. There are way more influential rich people that do genuinely corrupt our politicians. George Soros isn't really all that important, but he's Jewish.
Exactly.
Even if you don't know that's why. That's why.
Yeah, he's just an old guy they latch onto. Why? Because he's a Jew.
They singled him out. Now, not Warren Buffett, not any of the other bajillionaires that fund political action. No, just George Soros. Because he's Jewish. That's it. Yeah, he's started some political action committees or whatever, but what has he done? I mean, really, he doesn't really influence anything.
Or does he influence everything?
Oh, right.
It's sad to see. It's so odd when it's pointed out to people. Oh, no, that's not why.
And they're like, oh, wait.
That's obviously why.
Especially if you go back far enough, even if you're moderate suburban radical, don't think you're radical. And then you go, you look at your sources that you got your information from, just peel it back a little bit, go back a little bit, Jews. It always comes back to being Jews. I mean, alien conspiracy stuff, anti-vax stuff, all of it. It's all eventually about the Jewish peoples. And
unfortunately, this is how you get the Holocaust. This is what happens when you blame a particular group for generation upon generation. It's an ingrained distrust. Because they are everywhere, because they are marginalized, they are an easy scapegoat, and that's what the protocols are all about. Mm-hmm. And so when you do take away mouse from 11-year-old children, when they don't see the plight of the Jewish person at the worst times of humanity, it just allows these horrific ideas to metastasize, whether you know they're metastasizing or not.
All that's anti-Semitic somewhere down the line.
It really is.
Well, you know what? A lot of the origins of that are, like, for instance, the Jews control all the money, or the banks, or the Jews are rich and greedy, which leads to, they control the media, Most of that comes from the fact that during the Middle Ages in Europe, because, they were Orthodox Christian, in the Bible, it condemns money changers. And so even people of power, kings and other elites, they didn't have accountants. They didn't do any actual, money bookkeeping, except for every court would hire a Jewish person to be that guy. You'd be the court Jew. And they did all of the taxes. They did all of the bookkeeping.
That's an easy person to hate on.
Right, exactly. Because if something goes wrong, you blame that guy. Yeah, we're broke, blame that guy. And not only that, but then it seems like they control all the money. Why? Because you made him control all the money. This was you. It's not like he does it on his own, like he's a person that this is his ambition to control the money. No, this is a job you gave him because you're not allowed to do it. So that's creating a controversy, that's creating a problem, and at the same time generating a scapegoat. Mm-hmm. All in one.
Yeah, it makes the problem institutional.
Yeah, like you said earlier, migrant workers or, well, just immigration in general, all around the world. That's been a thing, including with Jews.
We've gone through the early hits. Now we need to get into their later career. They're Chris Gaines of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Late stage protocols. I think my favorite quote about it was from 1921. The London Times debunked it publicly and called it, quote, a clumsy plagiarism.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, Golovinsky didn't go out of his way to do a good job.
Now, and so you're going to see this again later, obviously. So strap yourselves in. You're going to have more ammunition to talk to your in-laws or whatever about QAnon, because guess what, baby? It's just the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It is a de-Jewed protocols. One of the major tentpoles of protocols that was taken from a few other early sources in the 19th century is blood libel, which is essentially blood sacrifice supposedly committed by the Jewish peoples. It's the same thing as demonizing paganism or, you know, any other religion where witches would eat babies or whatever. It's the same garbage. But this is now manifested in the form of adrenochrome. Everybody's favorite.
Sure is my favorite.
If you want to parallel QAnon, the entire thing is essentially just the protocols. A group of elites that are controlling everything, that decide our fates.
You mean the cabal?
Can't be the system that's wrong. The cabal. That's exactly right. And so the reason QAnon is insidious is because it's literally the same premise, but it's more broad. Back when the Protocols was around, it was easy to just villainize Jews because it was like, hey, everybody hates Jews, right? We can all agree on that. Also, this happened. But you can't really do that today because we live in a more diverse, more liberal society. And so they had to pick something that universally everyone hates and agrees is wrong, which is, of course, pedophilia, child molesting, human trafficking, that kind of thing. So that no matter what, the people who believe in this can feel like they're on the right side because that is sort of like an unquestionable, you know, evil. Like what we used to think about the Nazis, but not anymore, apparently.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the whole institution of blood libel, is to find something so insidious and so evil that you have to be for it. Or either you have to be against it.
Whoa.
Freudian slip.
One of the tentpoles of the QAnon thing is there's an evil cabal that is controlling the world and everything around it, which is sadly true, but not at all what they're thinking.
I mean, that's the problem with a lot of these conspiracy theories, especially QAnon, is the people who are buying into it. I see where they're coming from. I see why you are looking for a reason to explain what's happening, because you don't get it, and it doesn't make sense, and it seems to be wrong, because it is wrong. But you're pointing to the wrong people.
When the system fails, well, it succeeds. It does what it's designed to do, which is oppress some people, exploit them, and then make other people rich. When that doesn't work, after all the browbeating that's been given to us over the evils of communism and the equating democracy with capitalism, which really doesn't make a lot of sense, the system can't be wrong. So it's got to be something else. Of course, it's the Jews. Once again, it's the Jews.
Yeah. You get the offshoots of the protocols. You know, it's the anti-Muslim sentiment. You get the...
Oh, yeah. We'll have to get into that, too.
Yeah.
So in QAnon, we're not a QAnon podcast. Other people have covered this way better than we have. I wanted you to understand that these are universal.
And mostly because QAnon is so big now. As recent as last year, the end of last year, it was gauged that 15 to 20% of people in the United States are QAnon believers.
Jesus Christ.
And so it's beneficial for you to see where these theories come from. What is the underpinnings for these cockamamie ideas and how dangerous they are? Because you see what has been done with them before, And you can easily see it being done again.
If you're dabbling in QAnon or you know somebody who is and they start ranting about George Soros funding vaccines or whatever, really this is just the greatest hits. It's all of them put together. It's the anti-vaccinations. It's the everything from aliens to the cabal, which is just the protocols. It's the white hats are working in secret. It's the government's lying to us and doing this other thing. And it takes all of the groundwork that every conspiracy, especially in the modern era, has ever done and puts them all in one big blender and makes you a really shitty shake.
Yeah, the people are swigging down like there's no tomorrow.
Yep. And then JFK Jr. for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know if I can make a firm connection to JFK Jr. and the Jews. Other than, I bet if I Googled Hillary Clinton secret Jew, I'm sure that would probably come up with a hit.
Oh, I'm sure that'll come up.
You know what? Just for and giggles.
No, don't do that.
Secret Jew.
I don't like anywhere this is going.
You shouldn't.
Of course, this all applies to...
Hillary has Jewish roots, of course.
Oh my God.
The secret Jewish history of Hillary Clinton.
Oh my God.
Oh
my
man.
God.
Of course.
It's all there.
Of course.
Even the Hollow Earth and lizard people types. That's all that Hitler talked about. I mean,
Yeah.
whether or not you know it, if you're into this kind of thing, you're being anti-Semitic. You just are. And, since World War II, after, the horrible things that happened there, after the Holocaust, it became taboo in mainstream culture for the first time to criticize Jewish people or just make them the subject of any sort of... Basically, it just became a topic you don't talk about that. Like, we don't villainize Jews anymore. This is how it is. You don't do it. And because of that, the United States specifically needed a new villain. And during the invasion of Afghanistan by the USSR, the United States had a friendly working relationship with Muslim people. We just really didn't think about it. Like it was never a thing. Black community had, in the 60s and 70s, had a big flirtation with Muslim community. It was not considered a subversive or controversial threat to white Christian establishment, like Jews used to be. But when the USSR invaded Afghanistan, we took that to our advantage and we're like, well, since the USSR is by nature agnostic, let's arm the most radical Muslim zealots we can find and train them to fight against the USSR, which worked until that specific group of people became Al-Qaeda.
See, if Rambo had just stayed there, it wouldn't have happened.
Yep. If they just had the guiding hand of Rambo, his gracious hand. Yeah. That's why in Rambo 3, they thank the brave people of the Mujahideen, which is Al-Qaeda. It's Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Oh, and the Taliban also.
Just killing it, literally.
Absolutely nailing it. And so now we can just blame everything on Muslims now instead of the Jews. Hey, Muslims are there.
Yep.
They're brown.
Yeah, here's a group of people that we don't understand, and they seem to have a lot of resources in a certain part of the world that we really want, so let's make them an enemy.
Also, most of them are lining our pockets. Let's not talk about the Saudi.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Iran.
Yeah.
What was it, 9 of the 9/11 hijackers were Saudi citizens?
I know. It's...
But we invaded Iraq?
I mean, it's one of those things that's so blatant. Like these QAnon people who are like, I'm not into pedophilia, Epstein Island, it's atrocious. We need to get all of these people, drain the swamp from these secret Kabbalists. And then you point out, well, like, what about Trump, who's, Epstein's greatest buddy? What about...
Who has been accused of over 200 counts of sexual assault.
And it's just this cognitive dissonance. Nope, nothing.
Right, exactly. It's because they already have their ground floor in that we all have to agree that molesting children is bad. Okay, fine. But their back's up against the wall when they support people like Trump, who is very obviously part of the problem in that scenario. Yeah, he's definitely an Epstein guy. He's infamous for being a creep and a misogynist and a rapist, infamously, long before he ran for president.
Yeah.
And it's easier to manipulate reality around your beliefs than be confronted with the possibility that you might be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's exactly what this is all about.
Or you want to win so badly that evangelicals will be like, yes, this is a man of God. He's literally brought down by God, touched by Jesus, to lead us into promised land.
Even though he's not even religious.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you he has paid for many abortions in his...
Oh, man. So many.
Countless abortions.
How could you possibly say, hey, I need someone who's godly, I want someone who's of my values, and then you see someone like Trump and you support him? you're just going to shut your mind off and say, I don't want to look at that because I want to win. And my group is the part that he's the leader of.
When they sit down and you try to rationalize it, that's when you get these zigzagging explanations. Oh, well, he's actually secretly working to expose this stuff, with JFK Jr. in underground bunkers. And it's like, or he's just a kind of an asshole and a creep.
Yeah.
But which is more likely?
He's just playing 18-dimensional chess, and you don't know about it.
Right, yeah. The guy that said we should inject bleach into our veins and wanted to nuke a hurricane is playing fourth-dimensional chess.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. Or he's a f***ing idiot, and you're trying too hard. And I understand. The conspiracy theory thing, we've talked about a little bit before, but I mean, like, the United States specifically is guilty of really crazy conspiracy stuff in real life. I mean, CIA has done some terrible, crazy, weird stuff because they were given carte blanche after World War II. And they did work to topple governments, especially in Central and South America and Southeast Asia. They did hide things from people only to benefit the rich elite. That 100% happened. But the weird thing is being on the wrong side of the conspiracy, like knowing it's a conspiracy and knowing who's at fault, but trying to fit that into the conservative worldview takes some serious mental gymnastics.
Yeah.
They can't be the bad guys if they're doing the same thing you want. So I'm sorry. That's not how that works. People talking about communism, they're like, we're not. And do you know what communism is? Because I don't think you do.
Yes, please explain socialism to me.
Yeah, please. Let's hear it. And obviously that's QAnon, but then we get to this happened in the UK, but it's another glaring example of almost literally the same thing we're talking about, proving once again that this is a cyclical thing that needs to be addressed. In Birmingham, in the UK, there was a failing school system. It's about 98% non-white, but most of the teachers and civic leaders were white. So at one point in the Birmingham school district, they hired a Muslim. They call them head teachers, which are just principals in the United States. And they're kids that are mostly, they're from Bangladesh or Pakistan or India, and a large majority of them are Muslim. So instead of having white teachers trying to assimilate Muslim students, they decided to accommodate Muslim students. So like you had a separate room for prayer, because prayer happened more often in Islam than it does in Christianity. And there is no separation of church and state in England, by the way. In fact, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. In fact, in school, you are supposed to have some type of worship.
Yeah, that's mandated.
Yeah.
So they decided to just change the culture of the Birmingham School District, and it worked. They became one of the most successful school systems in the entire UK in less than a year. They were praised by politicians and other teachers, and they were held up as a shining beacon for their accomplishments. They weren't feeling condescended to by racist teachers who admit, there are some today who admit in interviews that they were racist. There was an institutionalized racism that they acknowledged. One teacher got fired for...
He kept calling the students pockies.
That's right.
Yeah, which is obviously racist.
That's bad.
Yeah.
That's bad. When he quit his speech, he said, the West is the best. Don't let them change us. And they're like, oh my God. How is that guy in charge of children at all, first of all?
Unfortunately, the institutions of power, both in our school systems, in our politics, and especially in our police force, the bar seems to be fairly low to keep out people who have these racist and engendered negative views about people.
This is how mind-bogglingly well these school districts turned around. There was one school in Birmingham whose graduation rate went from 4% to 71% in about a year.
That's kind of good. That's
pretty good.
Right,
That's pretty solid. So this is a bit of a rabbit hole, so strap yourselves in. Independent auditors investigated an employment dispute between 4 teaching assistants at Adderley School. The head teacher, Rizvana Dar, was accused of misconduct and inappropriate behavior and favoritism. And 4 different teaching assistants had filed complaints against her. And they came into work one day and she told them that she accepted their resignations with signed letters, even though none of them had resigned, which is, that's odd.
It's never happened to me.
It got so bad, in fact, that there was a special tribunal assembled from the school council to investigate and said specifically that they would not back the Adderley School District in any sort of litigation, which is unheard of. It's like a cop union. They always back them, no matter what, no matter how bad they are.
It has to be pretty egregious.
Yeah, even child molesters sometimes get away with this stuff. It's true. But that's when we get to the Trojan horse letter. So let's pretend that's unrelated for a second.
And for you that don't know what the Trojan horse letter is, it is a letter that is found and then sent to, I think, the Birmingham City Council. Anonymously. That appears to show that there is a secret Muslim plot to teach Sharia law and infiltrate Muslim ideas within the school system to then essentially take over.
Yeah. And it lays out point by point how to do it.
Yeah.
What does that sound like? Anybody? Bueller?
The weird thing about this one is, if you go through some of the facts of that, it might appear as though Miss Dar was the one who wrote that particular document.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily to go against Muslims, but the idea was to discredit the people that were in her way or that were opposing her. Those TAs, not sure headmaster, but
the head teacher.
Yeah, the head teacher.
Hillary Owens, Rihanna Khanum, Yasmin Akhtar, and Shahnaz Bibi were the 4 teaching assistants.
Yeah, because they were specifically pointed to in the Trojan horse letter.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to
as
be...
well as wasn't it the superintendent?
Yeah, he was a superintendent who'd been there for 20 years, who was a volunteer. And he had helped,
That's right.
set up this whole thing of, finding teachers who were Muslim, people who could interact with the students on their level, came back from similar backgrounds, teachers and people within the school system that could relate to the students and help them function better as migrants, but as ethnic minorities within this greater white European area to try and assimilate and work better, not just being shoved to the side or
forced to adapt to white Christian culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or not being believed in. Saying that, well, we're not going to put you in work positions that might help you ascend out of where you're at to be a doctor or a lawyer. We're going to make sure you get jobs as sackers at grocery stores or
taxi drivers,
because that's what you're going to be. Don't try to go past your station.
They were institutionally setting them up for failure on purpose, and this, whether or not they knew it.
And this letter, it was to attack those people and seemed to be to take the heat off of Dar. Unfortunately, what was done with it, just like the protocols, who were kind of set up to discredit liberalizing modernization within Russia, but ended up being used to help kill Jews for 100 years. This became a document that went up the chain of command all the way to the top prime minister.
Yeah.
They changed the laws. They stripped people of the ability to teach forever.
Ruined careers, ruined lives.
Anti-terrorism elements were instituted. It kind of fundamentally changed the way that the schools were run, that the cities were run, all because of this fake letter.
Which is basically just plagiarizing the protocols of the elders of Zion.
It's so sad, but you can see how it's so relevant.
Mm-hmm. That's a direct one-to-one, even more so than QAnon, because QAnon is so sprawling that, there's a little more wiggle room. That one is a direct one-to-one. Yeah. And weird thing is, that's kind of the point we're making. I don't think Dar did that consciously. I think that's just part of the zeitgeist. She took an other that has been villainized, and she just applied these tropes to it, and it turned into essentially a reprinting of the protocols. I mean, we're talking about a letter that, this is how garbage it is. This is a letter that was missing its first and last pages, so there's no beginning or end. It just starts in the middle. And it's very poorly Xeroxed, copy of a copy of a copy. And there's no signature. There are no names other than the people it accuses. None of the people take credit for it who have supposedly have enacted this plan, even though they're real proud of it. And it was delivered anonymously. So why would anyone take that seriously? Why would anyone take that seriously? Because it feeds into these things. These feeds into these tropes that the protocols, QAnon, Trojan horse letter. These are all classic tropes that have been used for essentially millennia.
Yeah. The way that Protocols exploits anti-Semitism for their own nefarious uses, this exploited Islamophobia. And because it seemed to be a group that they wanted to believe was doing this, it took off and ran like wildfire.
And ruined a lot of lives.
A lot of lives. Changed things forevermore. And that school system, all those teachers were pulled from it, and it went right back down.
Yep, now it's terrible again, apparently. I think it dropped like 30% graduation rate in the following year.
Sounds right. It's horrible.
Yeah, it's really horrible. And I mean, it got to the point where, they were talking about it, in Parliament. They enacted laws talking about condemning. It's the same stuff they're trying to do now with critical race theory or whatever, where they're putting in vague language that could cover basically anything that keeps white people in power and absolves them of any guilt or even reflection on the past. But these are real policies, real laws set into action, just further institutionally oppress people of color. In this instance, because mostly this is post-Israel Muslims, but, in the past it's been Jews. Mostly Jews. Even this that is specifically anti-Muslim is still about the Jews.
It's one of the things within the book, and it's one of the things every time you look at the different uses this has had and how it's proliferated over the years, it's exhausting. It's like, how do we change this? How do we make it stop?
It's so naked and blatant. All you have to do is just do a tiny bit of research, not even in depth. Even though it should always be in depth. There are credible sources that have been talking about this for 100 years. And it's so blatantly obvious that that's what this is. Like, how do people still keep falling for it? It plays into these base fears, and
it's an easy out. It's the same way that's like, oh, you mean I have to take care of myself and take care of everyone else. I have to wear this mask. I have to get this vaccine. That it's it's not one-to-one. I don't just get the vaccine and it just magically goes away. It's much easier to say, well, I don't believe in the vaccine. I don't believe in masks. I think this is oppressive and I'm going to fight against it because I want to, because I don't like this. Do you think I like wearing a mask all day at work? No, of course not. Nobody does.
But this is how it works.
This is how it works. This is how things are. Yes, it sucks. But unless we all band together and try to make things better,
it's going to keep sucking.
It's just going to get worse, which is what has happened.
Yeah, which is what's happened. Yeah.
But that's much more difficult.
There's also a lot of people who don't understand what the Constitution says at all.
Yeah.
And a bunch of people who are like, but my liberty. And you're like, well, did you actually read that thing? Because I'm pretty sure you getting my family sick because you're an is not a right you have.
It always reminds me of every time there's a political campaign going on, you are dead in the water if you say you're going to raise taxes. Even though taxes are necessary for everything, for your schools, your police, your roadways, all of that. You need these taxes. But no one wants to hear that hard truth. You have to pay more to get more. Everybody just wants taxes cut. And that's just not how life is.
Yeah, it's not how society works.
And so you're just sold the sugary sweets, but no one's forced to take their fiber. And we just keep getting more and more fat and out of shape. And awful. It's these big lies that are perpetrated. It's like the trickle-down economics. It's like it's never worked. Yeah. It will never work.
Never worked.
That's not how people function. None of these rich people give a damn about anybody.
Make the rich richer, and then everyone will be happier. Like, do you remember feudalism? Because...
Oh, you mean right now? Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about Amazon? Yeah. Jesus Christ. Apple, they're doing the same thing. Literally, you live on campus... and work for them and pay off your bills through their work. That's feudalism. You're a serf. Yeah, it's exactly what we were talking about. It all really just boils down to the system is broken. Everyone knows the system is broken. People are feeling the effects of a broken system, but the system can't be wrong because I've always been told it's right. So something else has to be wrong with it. Let's find a scapegoat. Mm-hmm. That's almost every conspiracy theory out there.
Yep.
I mean, that's the heart of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes it gets to the fever pitch of genocide. And
you need the cheap and easy solution.
A final solution, as it were.
You have a cancer. You could go on these pills and this radiation treatment. It's going to take months, maybe years. Hopefully, you'll get better. Or you could just put these magic rocks on you, and it'll magically go away. Well, yeah, everyone wants to choose the rocks. Magic rocks. That's great. But the magic rocks aren't real. That's the problem.
Did you ever watch Man on the Moon? Come on. It's all a grift. And people need to understand, they need the tools to understand where these things come from so they can better deconstruct them either through their own research and curiosity or when trying to talk to family members. Just go back and really think about the roots of all of these things because they've happened before. They're going to happen again, like Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, God, I was going to say it. You jumped on there before I did. We're still in simpatico, so...
Just keep that in mind. And banning books, especially things like Mouse, is a dangerous precedent to set. Much more so than even like the progressive Karen that's like, let's ban Huckleberry Finn because they use the N-word. Like, even that's less harmful than banning a book like Mouse, which depicts the worst of humanity as a warning for thinly veiled reasons. That is way more dangerous. And things like The Plan and Mouse need to be read, need to be taught, so that everyone understands where these things come from. And just remember, everything comes back to the juice. It all boils down to the juice. That's how it is. It's true.
Yeah. Hey, guys, we're sorry that this was such a downer, but, you know,
it's important.
It's important. Sometimes you gotta eat your medicine.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't always taste good going down, but, man, you'll feel better in the morning.
Protocols a day will keep the anti-Semites away.
Jews away?
No, I was trying to...
Oh, okay, yeah, that's not right. That's
nope,
not right.
nope, that's... it's hard to find a joke that I can do that's good.
There really isn't anything here. It's really no jokes to be had. I hate to say it. When we say support your local comic shops and retailers, we mean that not just in the surface capitalistic sense, supporting local businesses and specifically in that genre, but this is literally censoring art. And I never thought I'd live long enough to where World War II and the Holocaust are kind of like shrugged off, and that should last forever, right? We've established the Nazis are evil, but then the 21st century was like, wait, hold on.
Them Nazis still got legs.
So it's important to keep these things in perspective. The only reason we know about the Holocaust was because when Eisenhower went in, helped liberate those camps, he said, take pictures, document everything, take all the records, because eventually they're not going to believe you. And he was right. So it's important that these things are documented for posterity. Otherwise, it's just going to happen again.
And we can't have that.
Nope. There's a controversial stance. And also, it's a good book.
Yeah. I mean, Mouse is a great book. Plot's a good book. They're great. Go read. Reading's good.
Support art. Doesn't matter what form it takes. Just support art. Jesus
Unless
Christ.
it's anti-Semitic art, maybe.
Please follow, subscribe,
do those things.
Like us wherever you get your podcasts.
We promise we will be funnier next time. Guaranteed.
I wouldn't guarantee that. We're going to be shelling out a lot in the civil suit that follows after this.
Guarantee.
I guarantee.
Oh, man, I was hoping you were going to do that. That dude was awesome.
Chef Justin.
Yes. Oh, man.
Wow. Men of a certain age. Jesus Christ. Nobody remembers Justin anymore.
Occasional little bit of guarantee. Mm-hmm. That dude is great.
He was like Colonel Sanders, but Cajun. That's the bow we're putting on top of this. But yeah, don't forget, of course, in all reality, to support your local comic shops and retailers. And from Dispatch Ajax, we'd like to say Godspeed, fair wizard.
Remember, no matter where you go, there you are.